Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Nico Vinz, titled Black Star Elephant. Okay, so here's a fun challenge. Name an African musical act. Okay, now name one that's actually charted or has a hope in hell of charting on the Billboard Hot 100. Because if you start looking through that chart, you'll find the list of African acts that charted on is pretty damn small. Music from around the world already has pretty limited representation on the American charts outside of, well, Canada and the UK, and from Africa, you can change the qualifier from limited to, well, barely any. And yet, this year, that all changed with an act that burst onto the scene with eclectic instrumentation, a decidedly unique textured sound that was unlike anything else on the charts, and had an uncanny knack for lodging itself in our subconscious. And of course, the act I'm talking about is Congos, the South African-based act that dropped their debut album in 2012, and it took well over a year and a half for their biggest hit, Come With Me Now, to crash onto our charts, particularly in Canada, where it actually managed to break the top 10, which is pretty good because that song is amazing. But you know what? I bet that was not the act that the majority of you were thinking about, right? No. If you had asked what kind of music landed on the charts that had a decidedly African vibe, you would have said Nico Vinz and their song Am I Wrong? And really, you would have been half right. Nico Sariba is Norwegian Ivorian, and Vincent Derry is Norwegian Ghanaian, and it's very clear they draw a lot of their influences from African world beat music. But the song has more than a few hallmarks of their Norwegian synth pop background as well, which gives it a decidedly odd vibe from a production standpoint, and a song that I've really been trying to make sense of for months now, at least in how the pop landscape's supposed to work. In other words, I had to know more about these guys, so I made it a priority to check out their first credited album as Nico Vinz, Black Star Elephant. What'd I find here? Well, I wasn't expecting this, that's for damn sure. Now, to be fair, I didn't know what I was supposed to expect from Nico Vinz's Black Star Elephant, but what I got was something you don't often see. A full narrative-driven pop album, complete with interludes and real character arcs, and yet it's such a distinctly formed musical entity that I'm at a bit of a loss of how to really describe it. It's got the basic narrative arc of Beck's Morning Face, the broadly sketched focus of Tove Lo's Queen of the Clouds, and a song very reminiscent of both Europop, hip-hop, and world beat music. And you know what? I kinda dug it. Not that I would consider this record all that great or a classic, but you know what? I could see the appeal and definitely get why some people would want me to take a deeper look at this album, because overall, it's decent, it's pretty good. So let me start with the most fascinating and most frustrating element of this record: production instrumentation. It's a record that feels distinctly between the incredibly slick, hook-driven polish of Europop and the more richly organic African music. Now, in terms of production alone, these two don't really fit together. One being a genre defined by its texture, the other one defined by its lack of texture. And I'll be the first to say that I'm not really the biggest fan of how Nico Vinz's extremely polished approach, with their distinctly modern synthesizers and pianos, the brassy horns, the classical strings arrangements, and drenching the reggae and funk-inspired guitar tones in reverb, especially when set up against drum progressions that actually have a fair bit more texture. And yet, the mix still managed to have a lot more warmth than most slick Europop, mostly thanks to the thicker horns that form a really subtle foundation across the mix that I really liked, and more acoustic elements, most of which have a lot of texture in it and how they're played. The strumming and percussion on Last Time, Miracles, Another Day, In Your Arms, the decidedly African chants on My Melody, Imagine, the closer Ima Ima, the French spoken word interlude on People, hell, even the harmonica piece on Homeless. These pieces lend a lot of character to these songs and really highlight how strong some of the melody lines are underneath, especially on the Am I Wrong reprise Thought I Knew, which is probably my favorite song on this album, because with the surprisingly strong strings line, the prominent guitar lick, and the great melodic interplay with the piano, it shows just how well these genres can fuse if done properly. Now, of course, one of the other big factors here is Nico Vinz themselves. I'll admit there are moments where I feel that there's a hint too much vocal production, but for the most part they step up to the microphone with a fair amount of charisma and presence, especially with Vincent's more soulful delivery. I wouldn't say on the rap verses either of them are all that stellar, but they do alright, I guess. What surprises me is that they don't bring together more vocal harmonies. Sure, when they have separate vocal lines, they've got some solid interplay, especially with some of the backing vocals, but they could have done a little bit more here. Part of it is that their vocals are very smooth and pop-friendly, almost reminiscent of boy band material on songs like In Your Arms, which, in my opinion, isn't exactly a bad thing, let me stress this, but I don't know, I think they could have done more with it here. But now on to what I find most fascinating with this record: lyrics and theme. I mentioned Beck's Morning Face with regards to the narrative, and like that album, the loose structure of the story is our narrator trying to deal with a failing relationship. But instead of the personal drama that underscored Morning Face, Nico Vinz opt for more of a spiritual journey, to delve into their own lives and try to get a handle on what they really want, to find that inner peace. And what I really like about this album is the lyrical framing. Am I Wrong upon a deeper reading come across as awfully presumptuous about the the girl's feelings. But in the larger context of the album, it makes sense because at the beginning of the record, our narrator is confused, desperate, and honestly a little clueless. And that framing continues throughout the rest of the album. There are moments where he backslides, like on the darker verse of My Melody, telling a girl not to fall in love with him because he's only after sex on Runnin', and the moment where he tries to get the girl to open up on Imagine by showing some of his own vulnerability, which was pretty impressive. And what I really like about this album is the conclusion. After all the soul searching, we come to Thought I Knew, where he thought that he was sure of his feeling, but now is realizing that perhaps they do need to walk different paths, at least for now, which is punctuated after his mad rush to admit his love by the mournful strings that tell him, well, it's not gonna happen, at least not now. This acceptance comes through in the next song, When the Day Comes, in the lyric, today I will fight for me, today you will fight for you. And then we get to the ending, and here's where it gets a little less defined. The interlude Coca Dien is derived from the Swahili word coca, which means save, and then it's followed by ima ima, which translates from Arabic as striving. And the two paired together seems to imply a religious or spiritual focus to the final song, finding inner peace with the exultant tone which it seems to match there. But the second verse of that song implies finally finding that soulmate, perhaps the person from before, whereas previous songs imply a certain distance between them at the very end. It's an odd moment and ties back to probably my biggest issue with this album. The musical framing doesn't always match the lyrical frame. Much of the instrumentation on this record is very typical Europop, at least in terms of tone. Lightweight, upbeat, accessible, not really concerned with heavier subject matter. And for a deeper spiritual journey, even despite the interludes that punctuate how important that journey is, I gotta admit, it's not framed with a lot of gravitas. And sure, it's charming on some level, but when you have songs like Runnin', where some girl's told not to fall in love and just keep running away from this guy, and yet it's framed as this peppy, upbeat song, it comes across as a little bit condescending to the girl's feelings. I don't get the self-awareness behind it. And sure, I get the feeling that the narrator's supposed to come across as clueless and a little callous here, but compare this to, say, Hosier, Someone New, where the condescension is intended very straightforwardly to paint the narrator as a terrible person. With Nico and Vinz, I don't get that same level of self-awareness, and just rings a little bit hollow to me. And the frustrating fact is that they are capable of some nuance here. Miracles and People are songs that glorify working hard to get success, a little bit simplistic, but they work in a pop vein. And Another Day actually managed to get the political for a few verses and talking about the world's darkness and their struggles to get to where they are. And then the song ends without a real climax in just over 2 minutes. It almost seems like the track was stopped before things could get too real. And I gotta admit, I kinda wish they went more in that direction, wish they added more drama to this piece. But then again, that wasn't Nico and Vinz's intention. They were looking to tell a lightly sketched morality fable about finding inner peace, knowing oneself, and discovering what you really want in a relationship, what you really need. And for the most part, they delivered that. With every repeated listen though, I do find myself wishing for a little bit more texture and flavor to complement some of the melodies. And I do wish the album was willing to carry more weight, and I'll wholeheartedly admit that it might carry more weight if there's some cultural context that I might have missed along the way. But for me, I'm feeling a very strong 6 out of 10, and definitely a recommendation. I'm not gonna say and promise that Black Star Elephant by Nico and Vinz will really stick with you for that long, but I do think you will remember it, because I haven't heard anything else like it this year. So go check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. What is your guys' opinions on some of the interpretations near the end of the overarching narrative of this album? I've tried to dig in deep, but the ending just kind of bugged me. So what's your opinion? Leave some comments about it. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.